Next up, live from Dallas, Texas, Dan Rousseau. Um, Phil, if you could spot Dan. Dan's got a presentation on weathering wood. Dan has been on the show before, and welcome back. And he
Thank
also
you.
did a modeling lifestyle several years ago that um, I participated in, and I believe Al Judy did as well. So we got a historic basis there. But welcome to the show, and Phil, if you could pop up his PowerPoint, that'd be wonderful.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'm really kind of bringing a segment of work that I shared at Harrisburg. As many of you know that attend the Harrisburg show, uh, Tom and I just come and show up and use all of our time to build things, right? That's kind of our gig. We're in the maker spaces and we like sharing tips and tricks and techniques of how we do things with other modelers and just helping people get more out of their modeling. I really started this back in Texas years ago as a way to encourage modelers with kits. You know, I do more kit building than I do scratch building. That's where Tom and I probably differ a little bit. Tom's a great scratch builder. And now that I'm retired, I probably am going to have some more time on my hands, hopefully, to do some scratch building. But uh, really, my goal was to get people to open the box on the kits, frankly. I mean, many of us have kit walls, right? You know, we could start our own hobby shops. And so it was a desire of mine to get modelers to take the darn things off the shelf and open the box and get busy. So this technique is one, I described this to Calvin Witt at Harrisburg. I said, I'm a lazy model railroader is what it boils down to. And so being a lazy model railroader, I search for ways that I can do things quickly. And I think our mentor that we talk about a lot of times on this show and at Harrisburg, Al Judy, certainly is the type of modeler that you know, learn how to do things quickly. He did that when he had his hobby shop. He's done it doing commercial work. He's done it, in his own modeling. And I think it's critically important to learn how can you shortcut things and save time so that you can focus on the things you want to focus on. For me, it's building structures. I love building structures. So we'll go to the next slide. The focus of this segment is on really modeling weathered wood structures. And I wanted to give everybody a sense that, we're not talking about expensive stuff here. I use the builders and scale. I also use, hunter line stains, things like that. If alcohol and India ink is your gig and you want to mix up, you know, your own stains in various colors, knock yourself out. There's not any one way to do this. So those are the stains that I tend to use, and the one that you see in the middle is a critical one that, for me. It's their silverwood stain. And you'll be seeing how I do this here in the next slide. The other thing I use for my paints is pure, cheap craft paint. You can get this anywhere. You can get it at Hobby Lobby, you can get it at Walmart, almost anywhere. If you're paying a lot of money for this stuff, frankly, you're paying too much. These things you can find on sale for, usually under $1 a bottle. Um, and the stains are cost a little bit more certainly, but I order them directly off of Builders and Scales website. So we can go to the next slide. In terms of tools, these are the brushes I use. I found these brushes a number of years ago, and if you can't find a brush like this at your local artist supply store or at Hobby Lobby or one of those places, frankly, just take some brushes that you've used for years that are beat to death. The key is you'll notice in those brush tips a lot of space, a lot of irregularity, um, fraying, all of that kind of stuff. This is the stuff that works to your advantage in this technique. So, you want to find brushes that either right out of the box look like this or ones that you've used for a number of years, or just take some and start chewing up your brushes a little bit to make them look like this. So let's go to the next slide. So the first tech thing I do is I take that silver wood stain on my wood and I brush it on the wood and I might put a layer or two of the silverwood stain on the straight on the wood. And a lot of guys will worry about whether it's going to warp or things like that. I don't worry about it with the paint. When the paint hits this laser cut wood, it's going to warp. That's what interior bracing's for, right? And things like that. So fundamentally, I don't really worry about it. A lot of times, once it dries, it kind of tends to come back fairly level anyway. So start out with a silverwood stain. You can see that it kind of gives you that very sort of chalky, silverish look to the wood. And that's my starting point. You can also add other stain colors to this. If you prefer a different, base color, no problem. Uh, Go to the next slide. So this is when I start taking the color I've chosen. In this case, it was a white, and I start dry brushing this in the direction of the grain. And you'll notice I put, the pounce wheel to these wall sections so that when the stain hit it the first time, you're starting to get nail hole um, relief and stuff like that, detail. And then I'll put the um, the dry brushing going with the grain, um, going over this, couple of times, and then, then you can go to the next slide. I'll start to go in and stipple paint some of the white in there to add texture up on top of what I've already dry brushed. You'll notice that the trim was done the same way. Um, so to give the effect that, everything is sort of at the same level of weathering. Um, and we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. And then finally, I'll even go back over this with some of the stain. And I can use various stains at this point. But what that does is it kind of gives you some of the um, depth in that wood that's been weathered. The stain gets in there around where you've painted and things like that. So it just adds another sort of dimension, if you will, to the weathered wood that you're doing. Um, and we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, this is an example of really using the technique with just the stains and more so than adding any paint. This was a shotgun house structure that I built and used multiple passes of stain over the wood to really kind of create that old weather beaten shack sort of look, almost like a sharecropper's, house or something like that, with the tin, with a rusted tin roof and things like that. So we can show the next slide. You can kind of see some of it up close. Um, it's a very easy technique to use, and the key to it really is working it up in layers. It's starting with that stain or stains, putting your paint to it in a dry brush way, then stipple painting the paint on top of it, and then going back over it with stain. You could also use chalks if chalks are your thing. Um, you could even take some of the paint and use, thin it, ultra thin, and use that for washes. So, like I say, I found this to be a very effective technique that's easy to do in a few steps. So, any questions, or I'll open it up.
Yeah, hi
Hey,
Dan. This is Greg. I've used the silver wood and the brown wood, and I like them both along with my other stains. What was the third one you had, and how does that compare to the brown wood?
The dead wood kind of gives you something in between the two.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll use of their stains. I use also they have one that's kind of a um, charcoal. They also have one that is a yellow wood. I don't use the
Oh,
yellow wood
yeah.
that much. I didn't find that I really liked, kind of the effect I got with the yellow wood. I've used it on a couple of occasions. Um, but really, the same thing Tom and I love. One of the first things that both Tom and I do when we get to Harrisburg is buy up as many of the Hunter line stains as we can.
Yeah.
You know, and which is probably why everybody at the show goes, what happened to all the stain? But really, the Hunter line makes some great stuff too. I mean, they've got a driftwood stain. They've got some other ones that you can use. Like I said, if you want to mix your own, you can certainly go that route as
Well, I've got a whole drawer full of Hunter and some of the best, but I got to admit I use the silver wood a lot because it almost seems unique.
it
Where are
it
you
it.
guys buying the silver wood? Where are you getting that stuff?
So I'm just going to Builders and Scales website is where I'm getting that. I
Okay.
just go direct. It's been the most consistent place I can find it. And you can get it in the 4 or 8 ounce bottles from them. So that's where I go.
Okay.
hey, Dan, I may have missed it, but when you're doing the stain on stain, is that two different stains or is it just dry
Sometimes,
brushing
Kevin,
stain on?
that's a great question. Sometimes I'll go over that wood multiple times with the same stain, just adding layers to it. In fact, that's how I started the shotgun house. And then other times I'll vary the stain. I might go to the brown wood stain. I might add some charcoal stain in there or things like that. In fact, when I finished up on that shotgun house, I added some of the charcoal, on top of what I'd done as a um, final pass, which really kind of picked up some of that grain of the wood and defined it a little bit more in depth.
Or are the multi-layers more of a quasi dry brush? I mean, you're not flooding it every time, or that would kind of just make everything the same, right? You're
Right.
sort of
Yeah, I mean the stain as far as the stains go, that's more of a full brush, but if it's the
mm,
paint, I'm doing the dry brushing and the stipple painting, with the paint itself. Um, and the great thing about the technique is you can you know lay off or add, right? If the structure is just mildly weather beaten, right, you can go that route. If it's something that's been around and they haven't, like I did a yard office for Brady McGuire, who's since passed. He passed away last year, but we operate his Pennsylvania Railroad O scale two rail layout every Thursday night, and he had this yard office kit, and so I built it for him. And what was interesting about it was I told him I'm going to take this and make it look like, you they haven't had any money in the budget for 30 or 40 years to paint this structure. And finally, somebody scrounged some money up. And so the structure is 3/4 of the structure, or actually maybe even more of it, is weather beaten like that shotgun house. And you finally got on one corner of one side is a painter out there starting to repaint, the structure. So just to create that contrast and that scene.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay. Excellent presentation, Dan.
Thank you. Glad to share.
Great techniques. And as our founder, Jim Kello, is fond of saying, if you didn't learn something tonight with all these presentations, you weren't listening.